Albert Einstein once defined insanity as doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Well, that's what critics accuse the Energy Department of, making the same mistakes over and over in a project that has already squandered billions of dollars in taxpayers' money. But the risk here is far greater than financial, since it involves highly toxic nuclear waste. What's at stake are millions of gallons of radioactive liquid waste left over from the making of nuclear bombs, including the one that was dropped on Nagasaki. This waste has been sitting in tanks in Hanford, Washington ever since, while the government tries to figure out how to clean it up. Some of it has already leaked out of the tanks into the ground. It is so lethal, a small cup of it would kill everyone in a crowded restaurant in minutes. We recently visited the place where the witch's brew is being stored. I'm standing on the most contaminated piece of real estate in the world outside of Russia. I'm in Hanford, Washington on the Columbia River, and it is so contaminated because of waste left over from the production of nuclear weapons. There are 53 million gallons. 53 million gallons of highly radioactive liquid waste stored in underground tanks that are now so old they have leaked 1 million gallons of the stuff, some of it into the groundwater, and it's heading right for the river. So with 1 million people downstream, there's a sense of urgency about cleaning up Hanford, which is huge. It takes up 586 square miles in southeastern Washington. But for the Energy Department that runs the project, it's been a case of easier said than done. In the nearly 16 years we've been covering the story, it's been one foul-up after the next. What is this? Charles Anderson, the Energy Department's official overseeing nuclear cleanup, gave us a tour of what has been built so far at Hanford, starting with a replica of the underground tanks.
This is a model of tanks that are already built that have waste in them. Be careful with your head here.
Okay.
As we go in.
Oh my. It can hold 750,000 gallons of waste. Many of the tanks, built for the Manhattan Project, are more than 60 years old. How many tanks like this are there?
Well, we have a total of 177 tanks with high-level waste at this site.
The plan is to pump the waste out of the tanks and route it through miles of pipes
And this is the canyon, commonly
to
referred
this
as the
yet-to-be-completed pre-treatment facility. The idea is to convert the radioactive waste into glass logs.
This is where the radioactive waste will come from the tank farms, will come from those tanks. So we'll come in here and be treated, different chemical processes, and turned into glass logs for final disposition and to be disposed of in a landfill.
Now, the last time I was here was 2001. This wasn't here at all.
Now, this was a field out here.
So do you consider that you've made a lot of progress? How would you
It's been significant progress. Plant's 35% complete in regard to construction.
But wait, this is a total ghost town. What happened here? What happened here is that after 3 years of welding, pouring cement, and laying miles of pipes and tons of steel, construction came to a screeching halt last year because the Energy Department underestimated by 40% how strong the building must be to withstand an earthquake. We're talking about a building that'd be full of radioactive liquid. Jean Aloise is with the GAO, Congress's investigative arm.
In a building like this, you need to build it to ensure that it withstands whatever an earthquake may pose, if there is one, because we absolutely do not want a breach of this radioactive material in the atmosphere.
But here's what we have learned, that the Energy Department and the contractor Bechtel went ahead with the plant knowing their seismic standard might be off. Just as construction was about to begin in July of 2002, an independent safety board sent this letter warning the department.
Energy debated with the safety board for almost 2 years over the standards. And
okay, let me understand this. This is brought up as an issue in 2002. Instead of going back right then, they debate until 2005, during which time they're building the building?
They're building the building.
Building it with the wrong seismic standard. Because they did factor in some margin of safety, the contractor Bechtel has told the Energy Department There is no restructuring required on the foundation or the walls. But
what they do have to fix is the internal components of the building. Hangars, piping, vessel supports, all of this interior of the building, where the technology is going to rest, that all has to be re-engineered. They have to review tens of thousands of designs.
the seismic miscalculation is costing at least $800 million and a 2 to 4 year delay in completing the building. This practice of pushing ahead with construction before the engineering is complete is known as fast track. The people in the state of Washington who are living with this thing, they don't want it to slow down. They want it to speed up.
But it doesn't work, in our view, on complex technical nuclear facilities like the ones at Hanford.
So what do you tell the people of Washington? You're going to have to live with that gunk leaking?
That we need to do it right.
Fast track was singled out as a major problem 5 years ago when we last reported on the cleanup. Gary Jones, a GAO investigator in 2001, told us about how they had rushed ahead with construction of this building at a similar site in Idaho before the designs were finished. We asked her about it back then. You're saying they went ahead and built the building, and then when they were finished making all the changes, the equipment wouldn't fit in the building?
The equipment for this particular process would not fit into the building as designed.
It can't be true. It can't be true. It's true.
It's true.
5 years ago, we were assured the government had learned from its mistakes and things were finally under control. And yet, since then, costs have gone through the roof, up more than 150%. And the start date for making those glass logs has slipped 7 years to 2018. The seismic era was only one of several snafus. Tom Carpenter of the watchdog group, the Government Accountability Project, got a hold of these internal Energy Department and Bechtel documents, which reveal a series of problems with a special tank for processing or scrubbing the nuclear waste. The problems began when Bechtel hired an outside vendor to build it.
They gave the wrong design specs to the manufacturer.
They gave the wrong specs? Wait
Yes.
a minute. You're saying that Bechtel hired someone to actually build this thing
Right?
and gave them the wrong design?
They gave them a less strict nuclear design.
According to the documents, when the tank arrived at Hanford, it had, quote, cracked stay wells. They were fixed. But then, quote, different types of well defects were discovered. And yet, Bechtel went ahead and installed the scrubber tank anyway.
They still said, well, we can fix those when the tank's installed. So they went ahead and installed it with defects, all right?
Knowing
it.
Yeah,
okay. So at this point, Bechtel demanded and then received a $15 million bonus for meeting a milestone. The milestone said install a tank.
And they did.
And they did. And then they said, okay, we've done what you've asked, give us the money.
Bechtel wouldn't give us an on-camera interview, but did tell us that the $15 million wasn't a bonus, it was a fee. In any event, after they got the money, a, quote, new deficiency was discovered by independent inspectors for Washington State. This is after it's installed,
Yes,
right?
after
Okay.
it's installed,
Okay.
finds new deficiencies, new problems with
That no
wells.
one else had found.
No one else had found. Okay, the red flag goes up, and a full inspection is then ordered on the tank. Well, the full inspection should have been done at the factory where they built the tank.
They didn't.
There's
They
a
should have
breakdown
done
in the
it?
systems.
It should have been done?
Absolutely.
Part of the contract?
Sure.
The full inspection finally led Bechtel to realize the tank was not up to spec. But that's not all.
The design flaws that led to this tank being deficient applied to 66 other vessels, 7 of which had already been built, and they had to go and redesign the ones that had not been built and fix the ones that had been built. And it really raises a big question about, well, what have they not caught out there? What other equipment or tools or machinery is installed, maybe under feet of concrete, that these programs failed to catch because their programs failed. The contractor failed, the Department of Energy failed, it took an independent inspector to find new deficiencies. Where's the adult supervision here? We are talking a nuclear facility handling some of the worst waste in the world and they're fast-tracking it? Excuse me.
We asked Charles Anderson of the Energy Department about this. When you hear they gave the wrong design specifications, you almost can't believe it on one piece of equipment. And then when you hear it's been repeated over and over, that doesn't sound like the Department of Energy is managing the situation very well.
Well, there's a number of those issues that have occurred. Those issues have been identified and corrected, but there's also a large percentage of equipment where the specs have been correctly given. The equipment's been purchased correctly.
But there shouldn't be mistakes like that in a plant like this, should there?
Well, Lesley, in a large, complex facility project like this, you do have mistakes.
These are big mistakes.
These are big mistakes. I would agree that there are big mistakes here that we are taking control of and we're correcting.
You know, I'm getting a little deja vu here, because when we were here in 2001, I mean, it was the same thing. We figured it out. It's better now. No problem anymore. Do you think, being candid with us, that the department's up to this?
Well, here's what's different now. We've taken steps to provide increased oversight, to reach out for increased external reviews to complete this important work of disposing of this, of stabilizing and then disposing of this waste.
Anderson says that the leaking tanks have been stabilized and that there's virtually no chance of further seepage. But Christine Gregoire, the governor of Washington State, who's worked on this issue from the beginning, doesn't believe that for 1 minute.
Let me tell you the story. 1989. They told me there was zero chance that there would be any leakage and groundwater contamination. 16 years later, we have confirmed 67 leakers, groundwater contamination. I told them then, gravity works like this, and I'll tell them again today. Gravity means we are very vulnerable to the groundwater contamination and a plume that we now have moving towards the Columbia River, which is the lifeline of our Pacific Northwest.
A plume.
A plume
What
of
does
contamination.
What does that mean, a plume?
We've got an area that is contaminated in the groundwater and is migrating towards the Columbia River. And if it gets there, Lesley, we have an absolute disaster on our hands.
She's worried about a move in Congress to cut the budget for the Hanford cleanup.
I can understand the frustration in Congress. Frankly, they're no more frustrated than me.
Right.
But the last thing we need is to send a message to this country that it's okay to walk away. It is not. The chances of a catastrophic event over there are real. Time is not on our side. We need to get going.
After World War II, in its zeal to win the arms race and stockpile nuclear bombs, did the U.S. government deliberately put its own civilians in danger, or did it truly not know how hazardous it was to work around uranium and plutonium? Well, this year, for the first time, the government has admitted that it knew all along and kept the information secret. Among those who were victims of that policy are 4 veterans of a uranium processing plant who told Harry Reasoner they were never informed that the jobs they were doing could kill them.
I've seen the conditions so bad out there that the birds would die flying from one plant to the other. The fumes would be so bad in the refinery.
The bird would actually die.
The bird would actually die and fall out on the pads.
Herb Kelly worked as a machinist for 27 years. He worked here at the Feed Materials Production Center in Fernald, Ohio. When this plant opened in the early 1950s, the water towers were painted in red and white checkerboard squares. People in the area who didn't work at the plant thought they might be making pet food out here. Not so. They processed uranium at this facility, turning it into ingots, and then feeding the materials to one of 17 other nuclear weapons plants scattered around the country. When did you leave, Herb?
I left November 27, 1984.
And what's your present condition?
My present condition is that I've got cancer of the lungs, fibrosis of the lungs, Fanconi syndrome, a kidney infection, which is fatal over a period of time.
Don, what's the state of your health?
I've got cancer of the lung and on the adrenal gland. I'm undergoing chemotherapy treatments right now.
No surgery?
No, they couldn't. It's inoperable. I've got it so many places.
For years, Fernald has been touchy about secrecy. Employees are told if they talk about their jobs with anyone on the outside, even with their wives, it's a breach of national security. These pictures were made when the plant was being run by the original contractor, National Lead of Ohio. They pulled out in 1986, and Westinghouse took over. Today, production has been stopped, and the workforce is slowly being laid off. But during its heyday, when Fernald was at full capacity, they dumped hundreds of thousands of pounds of radioactive material into the air, water, and soil, not to mention into the bodies of its workers.
Did you notice when you were still there, or that other fellows were getting sick?
Oh, yeah, I've seen a lot of the guys that I worked with died pretty young.
Yeah.
You know.
When you saw these other guys getting sick and strange illnesses, and in some cases dying, why'd you stay on?
Had to have a job, had a family, and
Good pay?
good pay. Yeah, I've made a good living off of the place. But like I say, back then we wasn't really concerned about it because everything they told us, you know, it wouldn't hurt you and things like that.
But it did hurt them, and the younger workers as well, the ones who are now being laid off, and who are finding that even if they appear to be in good health, people are afraid to hire them.
What would they be afraid of?
Well, I think basically the thing that they would be afraid of is I would probably and more than likely have a working life of maybe 10 to 15 years. And then after that, if the plutonium kicked into a certain part of my body, like, you know, gave me bone cancer or liver ailment or something like that, I would be on sick leave for the rest of my life.
And they'd be stuck with it.
And they would be stuck with me.
Robert Casey was a chemical mixer at Fernald, laid off in 1988.
I've never seen a chemical mixer at work in a uranium plant. What did you do?
It's like a baker that would be baking bread, you know, so much flour, so much yeast, so much sugar, so much salt, you know, and then you would come up with bread. Well, I was the same thing, only I was using acids, caustics.
And what did you come out? What kind of a cake did you come out with?
Well, I came out with a Euro 3 orange oxide.
The part that makes the explosion in a nuclear weapon?
The part that helps make the
Helps make
explosion.
the explosion.
Yeah, it helps make the explosion.
Among the ingredients in those cakes he was baking was highly radioactive plutonium. Casey says he was never told how dangerous it was for anyone to be exposed to it, let alone handle it every day.
They knew what was in that product before I went into that plant to work with it. You understand what I'm saying? So if they didn't tell me before I went into the plant to work with it that I would have a chance of being contaminated from out-of-spec material, then I went in unknowing what I was working with. So that was an unfair thing to do. See, they knew it was out of spec. All they had to do was tell me to say, I could have told them bye.
Robert Casey continued to work at Fernald after Westinghouse took over, and was shocked to learn from an independent lab in Canada that he had 10 times more radiation in his body than Westinghouse had told him he had. He says when he complained to Westinghouse, he was laid off, and his medical coverage was dropped. Except for odd jobs as a laborer, he's been out of work for almost 2 years. Dave Day, a union official at Fernald, told us that a lot of people who have worked at weapons plants are classified as undesirable as far as finding a job.
There are quite a few people who, when they get out into the job market, they are told stories like, we'd like to hire you, but because you worked at Fernald, you're a risk, and we can't afford to put you on our insurance plan because it will raise the premiums for everybody else.
And that's widespread?
From what I hear, it is.
He told us what happened to one of his union members who was laid off at Fernald but was lucky enough to find another job. Well, lucky may not be quite the word.
He went out to the plant and started working for a few weeks, and the secretary came out and she said, I'd like you to come into the office for a few minutes. She said, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to turn down your application. And he said, I don't understand what you mean about turning down my application. You accepted me, I've been working for 2 weeks. And she said, well, we found out that you work for Fernald, and it's going to hurt our insurance policy, and the premiums are going to go up. We just can't deal with that. So he was let go.
And it's not just Fernald. This is the Rocky Flats plant outside Denver, where they assemble the triggers that detonate warheads. Dory Costco worked in the shipping department here and found it was not only tough to get another job, she had to listen to a lot of sick jokes as well.
The gentleman who was interviewing me stretched and yawned and acted like he was bored, and then he started asking me specific questions about what I did at Rocky Flats. And then finally he asked me if I glowed in the dark.
She sent out 100 resumes and was stunned that only 4 people would give her an interview. Did any of them indicate that your previous job at Rocky Flats was a reason for turning you down?
No, no. And they were very careful not to do that. You could read the concern in their faces, but they couldn't voice the concerns.
Herb Kelly says he never thought too much about exposure because he wore a badge that was supposed to tell him when the radiation got too hot.
They said that the badge was to monitor the radiation you were getting, but I never did come up hot or nothing. I've had it in my home for years and in my automobile, and they said there wasn't nothing wrong with those badges, but it turned out that they were too hot to handle.
The risks have been so downplayed that even when workers knew they were exposed to radiation, they didn't think it could hurt them.
It didn't bother me because you get more than that, more of an exposure than that if you go to the dentist for x-rays, your dental x-rays.
In fact, there's been almost a sort of worldwide conspiracy to minimize the risk.
Dr. Alice Stewart has been studying the effects of radiation on people for 50 years. She was part of a team hired by the Atomic Energy Commission to study worker health, and in 1975 was among the first in her field to find that radiation was killing workers. Her report shocked researchers.
What it was saying was a very small amount of radiation was going to was liable to double the risk of a certain type of cancer. And I think that was the moment when I realized that what we were going to say wasn't going to be very popular.
And then, of course, you did report all this to the Atomic Energy Commission, or...
Yes, we did tell them, and what we didn't realize is that they were very upset by this and were determined to sort of, as it were, scotch it at birth. So that almost before the paper was in print, they were collecting reasons why we must be wrong.
Dr. Stewart and her colleagues were promptly dismissed, and the workers' health records locked up until this year, when President Bush's new Secretary of Energy, James Watkins, decided to allow Dr. Stewart to resume her study. In view of that, we thought there might be a new openness on the part of the department. We thought things might be changing. We were wrong. The DOE wouldn't even talk to us about workers' health problems unless we submitted specific questions in advance. Surely the government has arranged some kind of compensation for those who were wounded serving their country in the atomic plants. No. Even their health insurance is cut off once they've left the job.
I do have health insurance now because my wife is working a part-time job, and through her company, they allowed her to have insurance on me as long as we pay for it. Of course, it costs us about $250, $300 a month and she works part-time, and a lot of times she'll come home, her check is zero because it takes all of it to pay the insurance.
I don't want to lose my home, something I've worked my life away for, but I've been out of work over a year, and it don't take long to eat up what little savings you've been fortunate enough to put up.
You know, it's like rolling dice. How do I know when I'm going to get sick? How do I know when I won't be able to shoot a couple of rims of basketball with my son? I don't know these things. So I try to get as much time as I can now to compensate for what I might not have.
I had this idea that if it hadn't been for the war and hadn't been for the feeling that perhaps the Germans were getting bombed, we must hurry up and do it, there would have been a much more balanced development of the whole subject of sort of biological processes as opposed to nuclear processes.
In other words, the secrecy surrounding the bomb took precedence over every other consideration. It was at a time when something which sounded like it might save 1 million Allied lives.
Ironic, isn't it, that it led to all sorts of secrecy and things, which was what were one of the reasons why we felt threatened by the Germans at that time.
And which is now threatening an uncertain number of
yes, that's right.
people who work there.
Well, you can't really trust armies, doesn't matter whether they're on your side or the other side with scientific things. They live on secrecy, don't they?
Yes.
And it's an anathema, really, to science. It should never have been the first time that any physicist signed the secret, saying this is a secret thing. That's when Mephistopheles came into the story.
We asked Westinghouse to tell us about Robert Casey. What they told us was, call the Department of Energy. What did they tell us? They never called us back.
Even though the United States hasn't built a nuclear weapon since 1989, this year the Energy Department will spend more than $12 billion on the nuclear weapons program. That's $4 billion more than they spent when the factories were running. And there are more people on the nuclear weapons payroll now than when they were actually making bombs. What they're supposed to be doing is cleaning up the environmental mess created during 40 years of churning out warheads. But as we found out last October when we first broadcast this story, the mess doesn't seem to get smaller, and the price tag just keeps getting bigger. The bomb factories don't run anymore, but their byproducts, 40 years' worth of radioactive garbage, are stored in old underground tanks. None of the waste has ever been disposed of.
We're driving past some tank farms now on the right-hand side. You see the elevated?
Steve Richardson of the Energy Department is the assistant manager here at the government Savannah River facility in South Carolina.
So behind this berm is a 1 million-gallon tank with high-level liquid waste in it.
When the Cold War ended in 1989 and the government stopped making nuclear weapons, the Energy Department got a new mission: clean up all the waste. At that time, Leo Duffy was the first assistant secretary in charge of the cleanup program.
You know, we started out with $1 billion in '89, and when I left, it was about $6.3 billion in the '94 budget.
Duffy says while he was there, on an average cleanup project, 35% of the money went right down a rat hole.
One specific example that I thought was really a perfect example was the Rocky Flats solar ponds.
At the Energy Department's Rocky Flats plant in Colorado, these ponds were used to capture the radioactive runoff from plutonium processing. The idea? Evaporate the water, mix the leftover radioactive sludge with concrete, and bury what they call pondcrete blocks 600 miles away in the Nevada desert. But it didn't work, according to Vic Resendez. Resendez is in charge of energy issues for the General Accounting Office, the investigative arm of Congress.
After the contractor completed 16,000 of these blocks, DOE found out that the mix of concrete and sludge had not been in the proper proportions, and over half started to crumble. What originally was expected to be a $27 million cleanup is now estimated to cost anywhere from $180 to $200 million.
$200 million to clean up the mess they made, trying to clean up the mess they made. Now the Energy Department is trying a far more complicated and far more costly solution for cleaning up the millions of gallons of nuclear waste in the underground tanks at Savannah River. It's built a massive new factory to melt the nuclear garbage into glass logs for storage. Each log will be a witch's brew of hazardous and toxic chemicals spiced with radioactive waste. Today, at least 5 years behind schedule and billions of dollars over budget, the project is still just in the testing phase. But the Energy Department must do something. Even though the General Accounting Office says the whole process, called vitrification, may never even work, the Department of Energy is still pouring money into the glass logs project. What was the initial estimate?
I believe the initial estimate of the facility was just less than $1 billion.
And so far, how much have you spent?
I'm not sure exactly of the today's date spending. I think we're forecasting it will come in about twice what our initial estimate was.
But the General Accounting Office says it will be double that.
We estimate that the cost to vitrify those waste down the Savannah River will run over $4 billion.
Even if they ever manage to make the glass logs out of radioactive waste, what do you do with the glass logs? No state has agreed to store them. No one wants a nuclear dump in his backyard. No matter, the Energy Department is building yet another glass log plant in Hanford, Washington, and the projected costs keep rising.
That project's been put on hold because of technical problems, but we've seen the cost escalate there from $4 billion originally to over $50 billion now.
50 billion.
That's correct.
How much extra money, in your view, is being spent that we could be saving?
There's no way of knowing. DOE doesn't have the information systems to know whether, in fact, the contractor could have avoided some costs, and basically relies on the contractor for self-reporting.
You're kidding. You're kidding.
No.
Ever since the Manhattan Project of World War II, the U.S. government has paid industrial giants like DuPont and Westinghouse hundreds of billions of dollars to run the factories that made atomic bombs. At first, none of the companies wanted to do the dangerous work, and so the government was forced to agree to sweetheart deals. No matter how many cost overruns there were, and even if everything went wrong, the government was obliged to pay up anyway, and still is.
In essence, DOE pays the contractor for all costs incurred in managing the facilities.
Beyond the contract.
All costs incurred.
So they have a contract for X amount of money, but if they go over that, no matter for what reason, no matter for poor performance or frivolous reasons, the government just pays it anyway?
In essence, DOE is liable for paying all costs.
And he means all costs. Even $7,000 worth of golf balls and greens fees at employee golf tournaments. And $19,000 for umpires and scorekeepers at employee softball games. That's what the government paid at its Oak Ridge, Tennessee facility, where defense giant Martin Marietta has the contract. And that's chump change compared to the billions the Energy Department has spent at Savannah River, where two different contractors have tried and failed to make the glass log project work.
When the contractors do change for whatever reason, does a whole new workforce come in to replace the previous workforce?
We haven't seen that. For example, at Savannah River, DuPont managed that facility for probably 30 or 40 years. When they left and Westinghouse took over, of the 15,000 people that worked at that facility, probably less than 100 management jobs actually changed hands.
So the DuPont workers became workers for the new contractor?
That's correct. In addition, we paid them severance pay of over $60 million.
Paid who severance pay?
The DuPont workers that are now Westinghouse workers.
Why?
It was part of the contract.
You're saying that even though those workers did not lose their job, the federal government still paid them severance.
That's correct.
And they're still working there, of $60 million.
That's correct.
We had a hard time finding out what all those thousands of people were doing down there. After all, the factories and reactors are shut down. The glass log plant is still in the testing phase. And so far, cleaning up the environment around the plant is just a demonstration project. But somehow there's still plenty of overtime.
How much did you pay in overtime here last year?
I don't know that number. I believe Westinghouse was running to between 10 and 15% as a company in overtime, which is a relatively high number.
At its 35 sites last year, the Energy Department spent an estimated $200 million just on overtime. And remember, they weren't making anything at any of the facilities. At the Rocky Flats plant, the contractor, EG&G, is supposed to be reducing the workforce. But instead, it keeps adding more and more white-collar workers who spend their time writing work rules.
Try this work rule. How many nuclear workers does it take to change a light bulb at Rocky Flats? This is the work package spelling out the rules for that job, changing a light bulb in a radiation area at the plant. It's 317 pages long. Now, you're going to think we're putting you on, but it took 43 people to change one light bulb. It actually took only 2 electricians less than an hour to do the work, but it took 41 people more than 1,000 hours to put this little plan together.
We asked the Energy Department's Steve Richardson if he thinks the Savannah River facility is keeping 22,000 people fully employed.
No.
Well, that's what you have.
I understand that, and we're continually looking for people that are not fully employed. Obviously, not every single individual is, and both Westinghouse and DOE are trying to find those examples and root them out.
That may be, but as we said, there are more people working in the U.S. nuclear weapons program today than there were in 1989 when we were still actually producing warheads. The contractors employ 140,000 workers, and they're supervised by 5,000 federal employees.
What on earth are all those people at DOE doing?
They're supposed to be managing the contractors.
They're supposed to be managing the contractors, but they're not.
They're not doing a very good job.
Instead of reining in the contractors, they reward them with bonuses. Consider the case of the contractor at Savannah River.
How would you rate Westinghouse's performance overall?
They're probably average to above average.
It kind of makes you wonder what constitutes below average performance. The glass log plant still isn't finished 5 years after it was scheduled to be running. And now Westinghouse is working on a new facility to recycle tritium from aging nuclear warheads. And as usual, they're behind schedule and way over budget.
Was Westinghouse ever penalized in any way for messing up on this?
They were hit very heavily for cost and financial management problems at a number of key facilities, and the replacement tritium facility was one of the biggest ones.
Were they denied their bonus?
Their bonus was substantially reduced as a result of that. Clearly, we dinged them there, but there's a lot of other things going on the site that are doing better.
You say you dinged them there, and I have in my hand the report that you put out publicly on the bonus that they got for this last 6 months. And you say in here that they did nothing but make mistakes, and you gave them a bonus of $7.4 million.
There's some things they have done well that we gave them credit for going on this
Yeah, but why give them a bonus at all? If they mess up, why do they get anything? And $7 million is a hefty bonus in anybody's book.
$7 million in terms of bonus is not a lot of money when you're talking about a $2 billion a year operation.
By our calculation, since Westinghouse came here in '89, they have gotten bonuses that amount to more than $50 million. And only once in that whole period did they ever have an assessment, a performance assessment, that said they were anything better than good. Is this award bonus system working in the incentive way it's intended to?
I think it is.
By the way, do you get a bonus?
I am in the senior executive service, and all of us are up and eligible for a bonus every year as part of that system. But it's.
Did you get one last year?
No, I didn't.
Why not?
I don't know.
Because maybe the way Westinghouse was running this place.
I don't know.
Even with a lackluster performance record, Westinghouse has survived 7 secretaries of energy. Former Assistant Secretary Leo Duffy calls them the Weebies.
Yeah.
Who are the Weebies?
Well, the Weebies are, we be here after you. You know, we be here before you, and we be here after you. Those are the people that say, well, he's going to be gone, you know, and as soon as he goes, we'll go back to business as usual.
Since we first broadcast this story, it's business as usual at the Westinghouse Savannah River plant. The glass log factory now isn't expected to be running till December 1995, 6.5 years behind schedule. And after our report, though the Energy Department said Westinghouse's performance was only satisfactory, they still gave them another $6 million bonus. The U.S. government is no longer churning out nuclear warheads, but we are awash in the poisonous stew that was churned out when we were making them, tens of millions of gallons of highly radioactive liquid waste. 8 years ago, when we reported on the Energy Department's effort to clean it up, we found a slew of projects years behind schedule and billions over budget. However, officials insisted that they had learned from their mistakes and were about to get things under control. Well, have they? We went back to find out. How are we doing?
Basically, I would describe it as an abysmal failure.
From 1993 to 99, Bob Alvarez was the Secretary of Energy's senior advisor on cleaning up the nuclear waste.
If you were to take a cup of that waste and put it in a crowded restaurant, within a period of 15 or 20 minutes, half of the people would have received lethal doses. That's how dangerous this material is.
The material, the radioactive waste, is stored in old and failing underground tanks. Some of it has already seeped into the ground.
The largest and most contaminated site in the world outside of Russia is here at Hanford in Washington State, right on the Columbia River. It's the home of the Manhattan Project, where they made the plutonium for hundreds of nuclear bombs, including the one they dropped on Nagasaki. Today, it has 53 million gallons of high-level radioactive waste, and many of the underground tanks here have sprung leaks.
Those tanks are about 50 years old. They're about 500,000 gallons in capacity.
Harry Boston is the Energy Department official in charge of maintaining Hanford's 177 underground tanks.
And all around here are tanks under...
All around here, all around in front of us, are 1 million gallon tanks below ground containing waste.
How many of the tanks have leaked?
67 are known or suspected to have leaked in the past. None are leaking today.
67, though?
Yes, that's our numbers.
But Dr. Boston, is it a crisis? I mean, what are the words you use to say 67 tanks with the worst kinds of chemicals have leaked?
Well, first let me say it's absolutely not a crisis. It's not a crisis because we are safely maintaining the waste. It's very urgent, however, that we get on with this cleanup.
That's because radioactive waste has already contaminated a large pool of groundwater migrating toward the Columbia River, a major source of irrigation and drinking water in the Pacific Northwest.
There's 100 square miles of contaminated groundwater, and a lot of work is underway right now to hold that groundwater in place, to treat it, and so we ensure that people are protected and don't have access to it.
Well, wait, but you are saying there's 100 square miles of contaminated groundwater under here.
That's true.
That's enormous. This is not groundwater anybody's ever going to drink, obviously.
That's absolutely correct.
Another of his problems is the volatility of the waste in the old rickety tanks. Until last year, the radioactive soup in this million-gallon tank, which the Energy Department videotaped, got so hot it rose uncontrollably toward the top. Until engineers got the belching bomb waste under control, there was a real fear it would explode. Harry Boston says they're working hard to fix the tanks before there's a catastrophe.
Now, wouldn't someone have said that to us 8 years ago?
I would think so.
And it's been 8 years. I mean...
Well, for the last 8 years, for the last 10 years, there have been commitments to do this work, and we're coming through on those commitments now.
Behind schedule?
Behind the initial schedules on our current schedules.
The plan was, and still is, to convert the most highly radioactive waste into leak-proof glass logs that will then be buried in stainless steel canisters like these. It was originally budgeted as a $4 billion project and was supposed to have started in 1999. Now it's a $50 billion project that won't produce any glass logs till 2007. Yet Harry Boston remains unfazed.
Well, I've got a good team and a good plan and tremendous public support.
That's just the kind of assurance and optimism we heard 8 years ago when we visited another Energy Department nuclear facility, the Savannah River site in South Carolina. They were just beginning to construct a glass logs facility which opened with considerable fanfare a few years later.
We know how to make this thing work.
Well, not exactly. In addition to being years behind schedule and billions over budget, the facility has been plagued by engineering problems, among them this white elephant.
It was designed to be a pre-treatment facility, pre-treat the waste before it goes into logs. It was supposed to take 3 years and $32 million to build. It wound up taking 13 years and $500 million. And when it was finished, it created more problems than it solved.
It produced large amounts of benzene, which is a flammable, toxic gas.
Gary Jones of the General Accounting Office, Congress's investigative arm, says her agency issued warnings years before the construction of the facility was finished.
Well, in 1992, GAO said, you've got a problem. You need to look at other technologies. In 1993, a DOE technical review team said, there's problems with benzene. You need to better understand the chemistry.
So you're saying inside the Energy Department this was laid out?
Inside the Energy Department, they knew that this was a problem.
Okay, and they still went forward, is what you're saying?
They still went forward.
And at the end of the project, they say there's a problem with benzene?
They turned it on, they started operating, and they had so much benzene, it was a safety concern, and they basically had to shut it down.
This was a setback. This was a disappointment.
Greg Rudy is the Energy Department's top cleanup official at the Savannah River site.
13 years, $500 million, doesn't work.
Doesn't work.
What happened?
The chemistry didn't work, and it couldn't be overcome by engineering, is the short answer.
Wasn't Savannah River warned that benzene was going to be a byproduct if they went ahead with that facility? Why'd they go forward?
Because there were differing professional opinions on how much benzene and whether or not the system was going to be able to handle the benzene.
Instead of heeding the warnings, not just from GAO, but from the Energy Department's own engineers, Savannah spent $93 million on this incinerator in an attempt to engineer around the benzene problem.
As it got into the early 90s, then perhaps a closer look should have been taken.
The failure to take a closer look will cost taxpayers $1 billion to remedy.
And if there is a lesson to be learned here, what is the lesson?
Do not fast-track projects.
In fast-track projects, they begin building the facility before they even know if the technology works. Sound like a bad idea? Gary Jones thinks so. She blames the whole benzene fiasco on fast-track.
When you're talking about these very complex, one-of-a-kind nuclear facilities, it's very, very risky to design the facility, develop the technology, and construct it all at the same time.
But fast-track has been a fairly routine practice at the Energy Department. It was employed at this project in Idaho called Pit 9, where tons of radioactive garbage were dumped over a 50-year period right into the ground near the Snake River. Lockheed Martin was hired to clean up the mess. But using the fast-track approach, they constructed this building before the design and testing of a critical piece of equipment was complete.
So in other words, they started to build the plant before they'd finished doing the tests?
Doing the test and doing the design, that's correct. They made some changes along the way to the design. Once they completed the design, what they found was they had made so many changes that that particular piece would not fit into the facility as it was built.
Wait a minute. You're saying they went ahead and built the building, and then when they were finished making all the changes, the equipment wouldn't fit in the building?
The equipment for this particular process would not fit into the building as designed.
It can't be true. It can't be true. It's true.
It's true.
If this were to happen in the private sector, people would be fired.
Bob Alvarez, the former Energy Department official, says fast-track is an unacceptable risk.
A company that would take a risk like this would go bankrupt. But now we're looking at taxpayer dollars. We're looking at a system that's used to getting a blank check. We're looking at a system that has not been held accountable, that is dominated by contractors who police themselves.
And nothing's changed. We knew every bit of what you've just said 8 years ago. Every single part of that.
That's correct.
And nothing's changed.
Well, actually what has changed is that I think, in my opinion, the situation has gotten worse.
The Pit 9 mistake could cost taxpayers as much as $250 million. Lesson learned? Well, look at the glass logs project at Hanford. Harry Boston says they're not doing fast track exactly.
What we are doing is what we call just-in-time engineering.
But the GAO and even the contractor Bechtel tell us that just-in-time is just another name for fast track. They're scheduled to begin construction later this year, even though only part of the design will be finished.
You can start building the external structure before you've completed the design of every internal component. And if you just think about the way you build a house, you start building the frame of the house before you've selected your bathroom fixtures. You know how many rooms you have, you know where the bathrooms are, and given that foundation, you can move forward successfully, and that's what we're going to do.
But do you know what happened at Pit 9?
Not in detail.
Well, what happened in Pit 9 is that they did what you just said. They started to build the building. As they were finishing the testing, on component parts.
Well, what I will assure you is the firms we have here are using proven commercial practices that they've used around the world over and over again, and we have every confidence this is going to work.
Fast track does happen out in the real world. It could happen for a gas station or a bank building, something that's kind of a cookie cutter approach. But when you're talking about, one-of-a-kind nuclear facility, we've been told is 90% of detailed design before you would start construction.
But at Hanford, only about 30% of the detailed design will be in hand when construction of the glass logs plant begins. But, the GAO, the investigative arm of Congress, has said for years that this fast track has failed time and again, and it's inappropriate for these kinds of systems. Why didn't you stop it?
I wish I could. I wish I was all powerful. Once these big projects start to get a lot of money poured into them, it's very hard to stop or slow these projects down. And the Department of Energy, the federal managers, don't have the technical skills to really oversee these very complicated projects, and therefore have to basically engage in blind trust of the contractors.
And that's what's happened.
That's exactly what's happened.
In all fairness, the Energy Department has made some progress, such as removing contaminated soil along the Columbia River and successfully extracting radioactive waste from 2 underground tanks at the Savannah River site. But as Bob Alvarez points out, after they've spent billions and billions of dollars, they've cleaned up only 2 to 3% of the 90 million gallons.
This is an agency that really needs to have some sort of structural management overhaul. We cannot afford to continue to do business as usual with this agency. I think the Department of Energy has reached a state where it's totally impervious to embarrassment.
President Bush just gave his Energy Secretary a new assignment: transport by road and rail some 70,000 tons of military and commercial nuclear waste and store it under Yucca Mountain in Nevada, located a mere 90 miles outside of Las Vegas. The department assured the president the waste can be stored safely for 10,000 years.
For nearly 50 years, the U.S. government and the nuclear regulatory industry have been trying to figure out what to do with massive quantities of deadly radioactive waste that have been piling up at nuclear power plants and munitions factories since the dawn of the atomic age. Right now, it's sitting in temporary storage facilities, many of them near major metropolitan areas, vulnerable to accidents, environmental disasters, and terrorism. Every possible solution has been explored, from dumping it in the ocean to launching it towards the sun. Finally, President Bush, the Department of Energy, and the U.S. Congress decided that all of that nuclear waste should be moved to Nevada and buried under a mountain in the middle of the desert. Needless to say, people in Nevada aren't crazy about that idea, and as we first reported last fall, they believe most Americans will agree with them when they find out how the plan might affect them. This is Yucca Mountain. It sits on federal land not far from Death Valley in a remote stretch of desert 90 miles northwest of Las Vegas. The nearest commercial establishment is a brothel 15 miles away. If the U.S. government has its way, this will be the final resting place for 70,000 tons of highly radioactive nuclear waste. Beginning in the year 2010, it will be shipped here from all over the country by truck or by rail and stored under the mountain in tunnels for the next 10,000 years, which is how long the waste will remain deadly.
There's 6,000 channels of instrumentation in here, and they range.
Mike Vogel, the chief scientist at Yucca Mountain, gave us the tour.
What we're looking at here is a portion of what a tunnel would look like. There are 9 containers in here that are made to simulate what a waste container would look like in a repository.
Even in stainless steel casks lined with lead or depleted uranium to absorb the radiation, the nuclear waste will still be so hot and so dangerous, it will have to be moved with remote-controlled machinery.
The temperature might be in the range of 300 degrees Fahrenheit. Very, very hot.
Just on the outside?
Just on the outside, right.
And how much radiation is it giving off? Would it be dangerous if we
yes,
were standing
yes.
here? We would be in trouble, right?
Exactly.
As we said, the nuclear waste is currently being kept in temporary facilities scattered across 39 states, in cooling ponds and in storage buildings outside nuclear reactors. Some of it sits adjacent to rivers or on top of water tables. Secretary of Energy Spencer Abraham says 161 million Americans live within 75 miles of one of these sites.
We think that it just stands to reason that consolidating the waste in one facility in a very remote part of America will make it much easier to protect on a long-term basis.
How important is the Yucca Mountain project to the United States?
It's critical. We need to find a permanent storage facility so that communities that have the waste building up can get rid of it. And without doing that, we'll have not only environmental challenges, but I think it will undermine our energy security and our national security.
With the President and Congress on board, billions of dollars already in the ground, and only one more regulatory hurdle to clear, using Yucca Mountain to store nuclear waste might seem like a foregone conclusion. But the battle is far from over, and the state of Nevada is in full-scale revolt.
We in Nevada will not stand for it.
A coalition of elected officials, environmentalists, and businessmen is waging a guerrilla war to kill a project they believe has been shoved down their throats. One of them is Brian Greenspun, the president and editor of the Las Vegas Sun.
Congress started looking around and said, okay, let's bury it someplace. Okay, who has only 2 senators and only 1 representative, no political clout whatsoever, and who lives in a place that is perceived, at least, to be nothing but desert and wasteland? And they said, aha, Nevada.
The federal government still owns 87% of the land in Nevada, but people here say all roads, not to mention rail lines, lead to Las Vegas. When the Yucca Mountain project was first proposed 20 years ago, Las Vegas was still a fairly small city. Today, with a population of 1.6 million, it's the fastest-growing metropolis in the country. 5,000 people move here every month. And there are 35 million tourists who come here every year. City fathers say if you look at the existing transportation routes, as much as 85% of the nuclear waste could have to come right through the metropolitan area on its way to Yucca Mountain.
Makes no sense to me. Who wants to be the unlucky person who's here outside a hotel on the Las Vegas Strip when one of those trucks turns over and the nuclear waste spills? And you know it's going to happen. Accidents happen.
The mood in Nevada is one of outright defiance. The state is trying to kill the project by denying water to Yucca Mountain on the grounds that it's not in the public interest. And Las Vegas has passed a law making it illegal to haul nuclear waste through the city. The mayor, Oscar Goodman, plans to enforce it.
If it comes by rail, the only rail goes right through the heart of my city. And I guarantee you one thing, as long as I'm the mayor, it ain't coming through.
How are you going to stop it?
How am I going to stop it? If I have to put barriers up and arrest whoever is trying to transport it, I promise you, that's going to be done.
You're serious?
Oh, I'm dead serious.
Mayor Goodman says this isn't just a case of Las Vegas or Nevada screaming, "Not in our backyard." The nuclear waste will have to travel through a lot of backyards before it gets to Nevada. The Department of Energy, DOE, hasn't disclosed exactly how it plans to get all that nuclear waste to Yucca Mountain, except to say that it will be transported by rail and heavily guarded truck convoys over the interstate highway system and require between 1 and 6 shipments every day for 24 years.
This is I-15? Yes, I-15 and the rail line.
But Dr. Robert Halstead, who's been a transportation advisor to the state of Nevada since 1988, says if you take a map of the U.S. transportation system and mark the locations of nuclear facilities, you get a pretty good idea of potential shipping routes.
They would heavily affect cities like Buffalo, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, in the Chicago metropolitan area, in Omaha. Coming out of the south, the heaviest impacts would be in Atlanta, in Nashville, St. Louis, Kansas City, moving across through Salt Lake City, through downtown Las Vegas, up to Yucca Mountain. And the same cities would be affected by rail shipments as well.
Halstead said when Congress voted last year to go forward with the Yucca Mountain project, it did so based on poor or non-existent information about how the plans would affect their states or congressional districts.
You think DOE is intentionally holding back that information?
Sure. I think it's part of DOE's political strategy to withhold information about the transportation impacts from the Congress, period.
Nevada Senator Harry Reid, the second highest-ranking Democrat in the U.S. Senate, agrees.
Stuff isn't suddenly going to appear out of the sky and be in Yucca Mountain. You have to get it there some way. And that's the problem.
Senator Reid says the devil in the Yucca Mountain project is in the details.
How are you going to haul the most poisonous substance known to man across the highways and railways of this country, thousands of miles, through cities, towns, past farms, past businesses, churches, schools, residences? This is the big secret that the DOE has. We'll give you that later, folks in America. In the meantime, we'll just say we have a repository in Nevada.
If most of the nuclear waste moves by rail, a plan now favored by the Department of Energy, the city most affected would be Chicago, where shipments from the East Coast would have to be consolidated, then rerouted to Yucca Mountain.
1 out of every 3 rail shipments would go through the metropolitan Chicago area. 1 out of every 6 rail shipments would actually go through downtown Chicago within a mile or so of Lake Michigan and the Art Institute.
Secretary of Energy Spencer Abraham didn't deny it. Do you think people in Chicago know that a huge percentage of this material is going to pass through?
I think there's a general understanding that we move hazardous material in this country. I think there's an understanding that the federal government knows how to do it safely.
I mean, you're not advertising the fact that you're hauling this stuff through Chicago.
No, well, no routes have been finalized. We haven't made decisions yet. We're going to do it safely. We're going to do it in concert with local communities and state governments.
And Secretary Abraham says the government has been transporting nuclear waste for the past 30 years, but most of the shipments have been relatively small and not clear across the country. While there have been a few minor accidents, none of them have resulted in significant releases of nuclear materials.
I would stress that we move much hazardous material via rail and via truck in this country today. And we know how to do it in a fashion that is safe for the public. We are not going to endanger the public.
The casks used to transport nuclear waste have been smashed into concrete barriers, broadsided by roaring trains, dropped from high altitudes, and burned in jet fuel for 90 minutes, and they've stayed intact.
I mean, how secure are these casks? How durable are they?
They're among the best containers that humans know how to make to contain hazardous materials. On the other hand, the payload is so hazardous that only a tiny fraction has to escape in an accident or in a terrorist incident in order to have a disastrous or even a catastrophic cleanup cost.
Halstead says the casks are not designed to withstand all disasters, like the Baltimore Tunnel fire in July of 2001, when a freight train carrying hazardous materials derailed and burned for 4 days, with temperatures inside the tunnel reaching 1,000 degrees. But it's not just accidents Senator Reid fears. He worries about terrorism.
Every one of these trucks, every one of these trains is a target opportunity for a terrorist to do bad things. I mean, you talk about a dirty bomb. I mean, this is really a filthy bomb.
20 years of tests and studies have demonstrated the vulnerability of the shipping casks to a variety of possible terrorist weapons, concluding that they can be breached by explosive charges or anti-tank weapons.
These caravans so far are going to be 300 feet long, a football field long. It's going 35, 40 miles an hour across the federal highways. You think it's going to be hard to hit that with anything? Even I could hit it.
Could they be blown open by a demolition charge? Could they be blown open by a shoulder-fired rocket?
Well, the question that I think you should be asking is not whether those casks can be attacked only, but whether or not the current location of the nuclear waste is a more vulnerable target.
You're saying trust us.
I am saying that we have invested $4 billion in the science and the safety. And based on that investment, I am confident that we know how to do this in a way that's safe. Yes, it can be trusted.
But trust is a rare commodity in Nevada when it comes to the federal government. Many people, like Las Vegas Sun editor Brian Greenspun, still think of themselves as nuclear guinea pigs. He remembers watching atomic bomb tests with his father back in the 1950s.
He would take us up to the top of Mount Charleston when we were little kids so that we could watch the blast. You could see the mushroom cloud go off. And we thought that was the neatest thing in the whole world. And then minutes later, this pink cloud would come over and we would get sprinkled with dust. No one ever thought anything of it. 30, 40 years later, we are the thyroid cancer capital of the world.
A fact that has not escaped the notice of Las Vegas Mayor Oscar Goodman, who keeps a copy of a 1957 handbook on those nuclear tests put out by the Atomic Energy Commission.
They say that fallout of this contaminant, this radiation, this deadly material, it can be inconvenient. That's the way they expressed it. So I'm not going to help the federal government lie to us again. Nope, not during my administration.
The state of Nevada is still battling to keep Yucca Mountain from opening. It sued the federal government to stop the project, and it's trying to stall the Department of Energy's efforts to get a license to operate the site. Nevada has also recruited a powerful ally in its fight. Democratic presidential candidate John Kerry told Las Vegas voters he's against the project and that there would be no Yucca Mountain nuclear waste depository in a Kerry administration.
Some tragedies never end. Ask people to name a nuclear disaster, and most will probably point to Fukushima in Japan 3 years ago. The nuclear meltdown at Chernobyl in Ukraine was 30 years ago, but the crisis is still with us today. That's because radiation virtually never dies. After the explosion in 1986, the Soviets built a primitive sarcophagus, a tomb, to cover the stricken reactor, but it wasn't meant to last very long, and it hasn't. Engineers say there's still enough radioactive material in there to cause widespread contamination. For the last 5 years, a massive project has been underway to seal the reactor permanently. But the undertaking is $750 million short, and the completion date has been delayed repeatedly. 30 years later, Chernobyl's crippled reactor still has the power to kill. It's called a zone, and getting into it is crossing a border into one of the most contaminated places on Earth. The 20-mile no-man's land was evacuated nearly 30 years ago. But drive to the center of the zone today, and you'll see a massive structure that appears to rise out of nowhere. It's an engineering effort the likes of which the world has never seen. With funds from over 40 different countries, 1,400 workers are building a giant arch to cover the damaged reactor like a casserole. It will be taller than the Statue of Liberty and wider than Yankee Stadium, the largest movable structure on Earth. Nicholas Kai is overseeing the arch's construction. You know, when you think about it, you had this massive project going on, all these people working here, billions of dollars being spent because of one day 30 years ago.
Yeah, you're right. It was the biggest disaster of the nuclear industry, yes.
The disaster was sparked by massive explosions that tore the roof off of Chernobyl's reactor number 4, spewing radioactive dust into the atmosphere. The Soviets drafted over 500,000 troops to put out the fire and clear the nuclear debris. Thousands got seriously ill from radiation exposure. Today, 3 decades later, the cleanup continues. But as this recent video shows, the reactor is still packed with poison. Heaps of gnarled steel and concrete, pools of nuclear fuel that have hardened into a dense mass called the elephant's foot. There's still so much radiation coming from the reactor that workers have to construct the arch nearly 1,000 feet away, shielded by a massive concrete wall. When finished, the arch will be slid into place around the sarcophagus, then sealed up.
We will push it in once. The average speed it will be around 10 meters an hour, so it's approximately the speed of a snail.
Right, but that's pretty rapid considering the size of this thing.
It is, yes.
But the construction itself will have to move a lot quicker. The old plant and sarcophagus are falling apart. Just 2 years ago, a snowstorm caused the roof of one of the buildings to collapse, forcing workers to be evacuated and raising fears of further contamination. Radiation is not subject to the usual rules of life and death. It is virtually eternal. When Kai took us on a tour of the site, were fitted with dosimeters to tell us how much we were being exposed to. Suddenly, a sound we didn't want to hear. Hey, this beeper's going off.
No, it's not. It's normal.
You're sure?
Yes, I'm definitively sure.
I don't like a beeper in Chernobyl. I don't like that sound. Building the arch under these conditions is challenging enough, but some of the biggest obstacles have nothing to do with radiation. As violence gripped Ukraine this year, one of the arch's contractors backed out. The project is also $770 million short and has been plagued by repeated delays. No matter when it's completed, vast stretches of the zone will never recover. This is the city of Pripyat, 2 miles from the reactor. 30 years ago, the population was 50,000. Today, it is 0. Pripyat was where many of the plant's workers lived, grateful for their posting in a town that was the model of Soviet modernity. 9-story apartment buildings lined this boulevard. They're still there, but you can't see them anymore. The forest has taken over. A vision, perhaps, of what the whole world might look like were people to just disappear. It was springtime in Pripyat that day in 1986, and an amusement park was due to open in a few days. Andrei Glukov lived here then. So that Ferris wheel never had any kids in it?
Never had any kids. These bumper cars on your left
right.
had never kids on it too.
When you talk to your former neighbors, what do you call it? The accident, the catastrophe?
We just call it 26, which was the date of the accident.
26?
26th of April.
Sort of like the Americans call 9/11.
Exactly.
Back then, Glukov worked for Chernobyl's nuclear safety division. He took us on a tour through a part of the plant that had not been destroyed. He was off duty that night, but what he saw when he drove past the damaged reactor was like nothing he or anyone else had ever seen.
This was a terrifying picture. It looked like a sunset in a distance about 100, 200 yards from you. And this was the glowing core of the reactor.
That was the first and the only time you saw it?
No, that was the first time when I realized the scale of the disaster.
Glukov told his family in Pripyat to stay inside and close the windows. Soviet authorities covered the area with secrecy, told people they had nothing to worry about. But 36 hours later, over 1,000 buses were sent in to evacuate everyone. Authorities told people it would only be for 3 days. One of many lies. The people never came back, and Pripyat is being overwhelmed by the elements. One of the only things still recognizable is that old Soviet iconography. Drive through the zone, and you'll find that many villages suffer the same fate as Pripyat. A row of simple markers has been planted with the names of each one. But amidst this wilderness, the strangest sight of all, people. Just a few. Ivan Ivanovich and his wife Maria were evacuated to an apartment block near Kiev after the accident, but couldn't take it. They weren't made for the city, so 2 years later they came back. Today, there are 3 other people living in this village, just a few miles from the old power plant. When you decided to come back to live here, did anyone tell you it was dangerous?
It's really okay here. You know, when I lived in that apartment block, I got sick all the time. But when I came back here, I was fine. And I've been fine ever since.
You should never leave home.
I would be long gone if I'd stayed there. I'd be in the ground.
Despite the danger, Tim Mousseau also chose to be here. For the last 15 years, the University of South Carolina biologist has been studying the contamination's impact from a makeshift lab inside the zone.
Aren't many serious labs I've seen that look like this.
Yeah, this is an opportunistic lab. It's an old villager's house.
Rousseau's research has shown that the catastrophe continues to take its toll.
And we're going to attempt to measure just how radioactive these mice are.
What's the comparison between the amounts of radiation a mouse would have here and a mouse somewhere else?
Some of these mice have on the order of 10,000 times more radioactivity in their bodies than in clean areas.
The human toll has been profound as well. Thyroid cancer and leukemia affected thousands, though the exact number of deaths is still being debated.
There certainly is evidence that some of the genetic damage that occurs at the level of the DNA can be transmitted from one generation to the next.
So a nuclear disaster is never over.
There will be areas that will be contaminated for thousands, if not millions of years.
This makes the zone like no other place on Earth, which is why it's attracting tourists. If you've done Paris and Rome, why not try a holiday in hell? Check out the apocalypse.
How did your friends react when you told them you were coming on vacation to Chernobyl?
They thought it was very strange, yeah. But I mean, people have been coming here for a while, so I guess it must be safe.
You guess it must be safe. What makes you believe it's safe?
Well, would assume that the guides wouldn't bring people here if it wasn't safe.
Right, well, I hope you're right.
So do I.
Thousands of workers fled into the zone every day to look after what remains of the plant. Others live here year-round in one of the few places safe enough for inhabitants, the town of Chernobyl itself. Yevgen Goncharenko was our guide. He lives here too.
Why are you living here and not in Kiev?
Because I like this place. For me, it's very interesting, maybe even sacred place.
A sacred place?
For me, yeah.
He spends much of his time writing music on his bass guitar. Music as desolate as the landscape surrounding him. As desolate as the remains of this empire that has long since disappeared. A decade after the disaster, workers here built a monument honoring their colleagues whose lives had been destroyed.
The workers and the firemen made the monument themselves?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And what does it say?
Тим, хто врятував світ, to those who saved the world.
To those who saved the world.
That may sound a bit hyperbolic, but when the reactor exploded in 1986, radioactive dust and debris were carried as far away as Italy and Sweden. Until the arch finally seals up that stricken reactor, and no one knows when that might be, something like that could happen again. Unlike other historic relics, Chernobyl does not belong to the past. Its power will never die. Chernobyl is forever. The magnitude 9 earthquake that struck Japan on March 11, 2011, not only shook the ground, it shook the Japanese people's faith in their government and the nuclear power industry. You can see the impact of the disaster in the towns right around the plant, only you can't get there. The earthquake did some damage, the tsunami did more, but the reason many of them are empty and off-limits today is because of the nuclear accident at the Fukushima power plant next door. The whole area is now a radioactive wasteland, and the people who live there don't know if they'll ever be able to go home. Many don't know if they'll want to. 3 years later, the events of March 11th darkened their lives so deeply that many speak of it simply as 3/11. The hell that broke loose on March 11, 2011 was the strongest earthquake in Japan's history. When the shaking stopped, a tsunami raced toward shore with as much fury as nature can muster. Almost all of the more than 18,000 people who died that day on Japan's northeast coast died in the flood. The quake didn't do much damage to the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power station, but the tsunami shut down the reactor's emergency cooling systems and they started to melt down. Hydrogen gases inside the buildings then exploded, spreading radiation into communities more than 25 miles away. Today, in the town of Tomioka, the radiation levels are considered safe enough to allow people in during the day. Loudspeakers warn visitors that they must leave by 3 p.m. We were alone on the day we were there. The disaster seems to have stopped time. The clock shows 2:46, the moment the earthquake hit. And the damage to shops and homes looks like it could have happened yesterday. The stack of newspapers we found were dated March 12, 2011, the day after the quake and tsunami. You can see people had to leave in a hurry. That was the morning the government told people of this town and neighboring towns to get out quickly. Welcome to Okuma, says the sign. Population today, 3 years later, 0. More than 11,000 people left town that day and never returned.
Would you ever want to go back to Okuma to live there again?
Yes, I would like to before I die.
Norio Kimura lived with his wife and 2 daughters next door to his parents. The tsunami killed his father, his wife, and his youngest daughter, Yuna, a bright and cheerful 7-year-old. This is what their homes looked like before March 11, 2011. This is what's left today, foundations and scraps of memories that he keeps in a small box by what was once the front door.
This is a shoe she was wearing that day, which was found in a heap of rubble 6 months after the disaster.
Because of radiation, Kimura can only visit his former home 10 times a year and stay only 5 hours. In February, his allotted day came in the middle of a blizzard. On each visit, Kimura brings flowers to a small shrine he built to honor his family. They were among the 111 people who died in Okuma that day. The remains of 110 have been recovered. The only one still missing is Norio Kimura's daughter, Yuna. 10 times a year, he goes back home to search for her.
On Saturday, you were digging again in Okuma. It was snowing, it was freezing. Why?
To find Yuna, of course. And also, if I stop searching or gathering her things, I will lose the connection with her. To be honest, the reason why I can live my life every day is because I have to find her and her things. I need to do this to keep my sanity.
Volunteers now help Kimura dig through the piles of debris left by the tsunami. Everyone's dressed in protective clothing to limit their exposure to radiation. The digging seems futile, but on this day, Kimura unearthed clothing he says belonged to his surviving daughter, Mayu. On March 11th, the day of the tsunami, Kimura made a mistake for which he will never forgive himself. He was at work on a farm, and he stayed there.
Did you think then that there would be a tsunami?
There was a radio at my work, and my boss told me that the tsunami was going to be 3 meters tall. My house is 5 to 6 meters above sea level, so I was convinced that our home would be fine, and didn't worry about it after that at all.
Do you think there's anything you could have done to save your family?
I should have gone home right away. I regret believing the information easily while my family was in life-threatening danger. Even now I say to myself, what was I thinking?
When radiation forced the evacuation of Okuma, the town leader told Norio Kimura to stop searching for the missing and start caring for the living. Sahina's daughter moved here to the Japanese Alps, where the brisk air and the snow-capped mountains made radiation and tsunamis difficult to imagine. Kimura has traded farming for a guest house he's planning to open. His daughter Mayu talks about her mother more than her missing sister, and doesn't ask why her father continues searching for her. Their new mountain home is 2,000 feet above the perils of the sea and 180 miles from the Fukushima plant. Ghost towns surround the plant now, but 3 years later, there are still more than 4,000 workers there, all of them wearing layers of protection. Because of the exposure to radiation, the men in this building are only allowed to work 2.5 hours a day. They're not producing any electricity, they're just cleaning up. Were TEPCO workers adequately trained to handle the emergency?
I don't think so.
Within months of the accident, Yoichi Funabashi, a former newspaper editor, headed an investigation into what went wrong and why. It was the only investigation not sponsored by the government, and its conclusions were brutal.
I was very much concerned about the government not telling the truth to the public.
The revelations in Funabashi's report added to the public's anger and dismay. He wrote that from the beginning, the government had conspired with the industry to convince people that nuclear power is safe. So the government effort at the time was to convince people that there was nothing to worry about.
Exactly. Nothing to worry about. Don't worry, okay? Even don't prepare for that, severe accident, okay? Because that would cause that unnecessary unease and unnecessary misunderstanding.
And there's no reason to prepare.
No reason to prepare. So this avoidance ultimately translated into unpreparedness.
Mother Nature threw a real curveball to the Japanese with that huge tsunami.
Last year, TEPCO hired American nuclear engineer Lake Barrett as an advisor. Barrett directed the cleanup at the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant after its accident in 1979. It's estimated that the cleanup is going to take 30 to 40 years. To a layman, that sounds very, very long.
To me, that's not long at all. That's what I would expect for that kind of thing. It's a huge challenge. It's a big on-site mess that they have to clean up, and it's going to take them decades to do it. It took us 10 years to do 3 Mile Island, and 3 Mile Island accident was much simpler than they have at Fukushima.
Are they where you thought they would be 3 years later?
I'd hope they'd be further along. It's been challenging technically, it's been challenging culturally and politically for them, but they're making good progress now.
Sounds like you're being a little diplomatic.
Well, decision-making process in Japan is complicated.
Decision-making in Japan requires consensus, and reaching consensus often takes a very long time. The most difficult job will be to dismantle the melted reactors, but radiation is too high for workers to get there. For now, TEPCO is inundated with groundwater that leaks into the reactors and gets contaminated. Every day, 100,000 gallons of radioactive water has to be pumped out before it reaches the ocean. TEPCO is filling storage tanks almost as fast as it can build them, and they're notorious for leaking. Another enormous cleanup is happening outside the plant. Entire communities are being cleared of contaminated materials that will have to be stored for generations. This part of Japan is known for its agriculture, but the only crop growing now is the multitude of black bags holding the radioactive waste, filling the empty spaces in towns like Okuma. Now, some of the kids from Okuma live and go to schools 70 miles away.
How many of you would like to go back to Okuma? Everybody. How many of you think you will go back to Okuma? What's keeping you from going back to Okuma now? You can tell me.
Because there's a lot of radiation. There's a lot of radioactive material there.
These kids will be middle-aged before the cleanup is finished. Their homes could have been rebuilt quickly if it had just been an earthquake and a tsunami. It's the man-made disaster which will take decades to repair. This is the class that Norio Kimura's daughter Yuna would have been in if she were alive. Her friend Kureya remembers they ate lunch together.
Where is she now?
In Okuma. She's lonely, being alone in the town of Okuma all this time. I think she must be lonely.
About a third of the residents from Okuma decided to stick together and moved into what the government called temporary housing. Temporary is lasting a long time. The 3 generations of Kimuras that once lived together are now split apart. Norio and his daughter live in Nagano, 5 hours away from his mother, Tomoe. She lives in the temporary housing, alone in a cold and cramped room furnished with photographs. The Kimuras, like many Japanese, have a strong connection to their dead and feel obliged to help them be at peace. As long as the dead are in limbo, so are the living.
You've lost so much of your family. Why aren't you together with your son now?
I'm with my husband's ashes now. Once I find a proper place to put him, I'd like to go to Nagano.
What do you think the right place will be?
Our family cemetery in Okuma is contaminated with radiation now. I could come back 2 or 3 times a year to burn incense for him, but my grandchild would not be able to come. I don't want to keep him where his grandchild, whom he used to adore so much, can't even come to visit.
10 times a year, Norio Kimura visits his ancestors in the family cemetery, a place where he thought he would be laid to rest one day, and where his children would come to visit him. But he won't find any peace, he says, until after he finds Yuna.
Do you think there's any chance you'll ever find your daughter?
I know that the chance is very slim. But no matter how slim the chance is, I still cannot stop. From the outside looking in, I know that this is very unlikely, but I still can't stop, even if I cannot ever find her.